And following his instructions, I took a bus and rode over to the Golden Gate Bridge to Marin City. The sun was making a terrific haze over the Pacific as we crossed the Golden Gate, a haze I couldn't look into. And so this was the shining shield of the China going world ocean, and it wore a terrible aspect, especially as I was scheduled to sail out on it. Marin City, where Henri crew lived, was a collection of shacks in the valley, housing project shacks built for Navy yard workers during the war. It was really a canyon, and a deep one, treed profusely on all slopes. There were special stores and barber shops and tailor shops for people of the project. It was, so they say, the only community in America where whites and Negroes lived together voluntarily, and that was so. A wild, joyous place I've never seen since. On the door of Henri's shack was the note he had pinned up there 3 weeks ago. Jack Claptrap, in huge letters, printed, "If nobody's home, climb through the window." And it said, "Signed, Henri Crew." The note was weather-beaten and gray by now, but Henri hadn't given up. I climbed in, and there he was sleeping with his girl, on a bed he stole from a merchant ship, as he told me later. Imagine the electrician of a merchant ship sneaking over the side in the middle of the night with a bed, and weaving and straining at the oars to the shore. This barely explains Henri Crew. The reason I'm going into everything that happened in San Fran is because it ties up with everything else all the way down the line. Henri Crew and I met at a prep school years ago. But the thing that really tied us together was my former wife. Henri found her first. He came into my dorm room one night and said, "Kerouac, get up. The old maestro has come to see you." I got up and dropped some pennies on the floor when I put my pants on. It was 4 p.m. I used to sleep all the time in college. All right. Don't drop your gold all over the place. I found the gonest little girl in the world, and I'm going straight to the lion's den with her tonight." And he dragged me to meet her. A week later, she was going with me. She said she despised Henri. Henri was tall. He was a dark, handsome Frenchman. He looked a kind of Marseille black marketeer of 20 because he was French. He had to talk in jazz American. His English was perfect. His French was perfect. He liked to dress sharp, slightly from the collegiate side, and go out with fancy blondes and spend a lot of money. It's not that he never forgave me for screwing off with his Edie, only it was always a point that tied us together. And from the very first day, the guy was loyal to me. And he had a real affection for me. God knows why. When I found him in Marin City that morning, he had fallen on the beat and evil days that come to all young guys in their middle 20s. He was reduced to hanging around waiting for a ship, and to earn his living, he had a job as a special guard in the barracks across the canyon. His girl Diane had a bad tongue and gave him a calling down every day. They spent all week saving pennies and went out Saturdays to spend $50 in 3 hours. Henri wore shorts around the shack with a crazy army cap on his head. Diane went around with her hair up. Thus attired, they yelled at each other all week. I never saw so many snarls in all my born days, but on Saturday night, smiling graciously at one another, they took off like a pair of successful Hollywood characters and went to town. Henri wanted to get Diane into the movies. He wanted to make a Hollywood character writer out of me. He was nothing but plans. He woke up, saw me come in the window. His great laugh, one of the greatest laughs in the world, dinned in my ear. "Ah, Kerouac. He comes through the window. He follows instructions to a T. Where have you been? You're 2 weeks late." He slapped me on the back. He punched Diane in the ribs. He leaned on the wall and cried and laughed. He pounded on the table so you could hear it everywhere in Marin City, and that great long "ah" laugh resounding around Marin City. "Kerouac," he screamed. "The one and only indispensable Kerouac." I had just come through the little fishing village of Sausalito, and the first thing I said was, "There must be a lot of Italians in Sausalito." "There must be a lot of Italians in Sausalito," he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Ah," he pounded himself. He fell on the bed. He almost rolled on the floor. "Did you hear what Kerouac said? There must be a lot of Italians in Sausalito. Ah, woo, ah." He got red like a beet, laughing. "Oh, you slay me, Kerouac. You're the funniest man in the world, and here you are. You finally got here. He came in through the window. You saw him, Diane. He followed the instructions and came in through the window. Ah, ooh." The strange thing was that next door to Henri lived a Negro man called Mr. Snow, whose laugh, I swear here on the Bible, was positively and finally the one greatest laugh in the world. I can't describe it now. I will in a moment when the time comes, but this Mr. Snow began his laugh from the supper table when his old wife said something casual. He apparently got up, choking, leaned on the wall, looked up to heaven, and started. He ended staggering through the door, leaning on neighbors' walls. He was drunk with it. He staggered throughout Marin City in the shadows, raising his whooping triumphant, calling to the demon god that must have prodded his ass to do it. I don't know if he ever finished supper. There's a possibility that Henri, without knowing it, was picking up from this amazing man, Mr. Snow. And I say, though Henri was having work-life problems and a bad love life with a sharp-tongued woman, he at least had learned to laugh, almost better than anyone in the world. And I saw all the fun we were going to have in Frisco. The pitch was this. Henri slept with Diane in the bed across the room, and I slept in the cot by the window. I was not to touch Diane. Henri at once made a speech concerning this. I don't want to find you two playing around when you think I'm not looking. You can't teach the old maestro a new tune. This is an original saying of mine. I looked at Diane. She was a fetching hunk, a honey-colored creature. But there was hate in her eyes for both of us. Her ambition was to marry a rich man. She came from a small town in Kansas, and she rued the day she ever took up with Henri. On one of his big show-off weekends, he spent $100 on her, and she thought she'd found an heir. Instead, she was all hung up in this shack, and for lack of anything else, she had to stay there. She had a job in Frisco. She had to take the Greyhound bus at the crossroads and go in every day. She never forgave Henri for it. He made the best of things. I was to stay in the shack and write a shining original story for a Hollywood studio. Henri was going to fly down in a stratosphere liner with his harp under his arm and make us all rich. Diane was to go with him. He was going to introduce her to his buddy's father, who was a famous director and an intimate of W.C. Fields. So the first week I stayed in the shack in Marin City, writing furiously at some gloomy tale about New York that I thought would satisfy a Hollywood director. And the trouble with it was that it was too sad. Henri couldn't barely read, and so he never even saw it. He just carried it down to Hollywood a few weeks later. Diane was too bored and hated us too much to bother reading it. I spent countless rainy hours drinking coffee and scribbling. Finally, I told Henri it wouldn't do. I wanted a job. I had to depend on them for cigarettes. A shadow of disappointment crossed Henri's brow. He was always being disappointed about the funniest things. He had a heart of gold. He arranged to get me the same kind of job he had, as a guard in the barracks. I went through the necessary routine, and to my surprise, the bastards hired me. I was sworn in by the local police chief, given a badge, a club, and now I was a special policeman. I wondered what Neil and Alan and Burroughs would say about this.